Hello and welcome to this very special here on CNBC TV 18, coming to you from the salubrious gardens at the ITC Moria in New Delhi. The man standing by me is not just the global managing director of McKinsey, but he's a thinker, a writer, and somebody with many, many ideas. It's a pleasure to have you, Dominic Barton, on the show.
Thank
you very much for taking your time out. I'm curious to know, what sense you make of the global economy, because 2016 has started on a very turbulent note. Markets are choppy, oil's trading at $30 a barrel, and overall there's a lot of pessimism and gloom. What's your reading of the economy?
Well, there is. I mean, definitely the market's never had a worse start in history. There's a lot of worry that's out there with oil prices that are being low and so forth. I'm actually quite positive. I think that the fundamentals are still quite strong. I think China is not crashing. I think it's lower growth than it has been in the past, but it's still strong. We've got India, which is doing very well. The U.S. economy continues to power ahead. So I think that we're getting too distracted with indicators, and they're not to be ignored, but I think we shouldn't be distracted by that. And the fundamentals, are there. We've got urbanization happening in India. We're 33% urbanized. It's moving. We've got a huge middle class that's going to be built. We've got technological innovation and revolution. So I'm actually much more bullish than
so
what I see.
So the stock markets cannot be seen as the barometer for the economic fundamentals.
I don't think so. Over time, you have to look at it, but it's certainly not the Chinese stock market. That's more of a casino, in my view. It's a very small part of how the economy works, and it's retail investors. And I think there's a lot of hedge funds and short-term players that are looking at these indicators and moving in and out. I think if you look at more of the long-term investors, the pension funds, they're investing. They're investing in India. They're investing in the fundamentals, and that continues. So I think we can't get too distorted by short-term market shifts.
Right. What's your reading of China? In fact, you said that you're still largely sort of optimistic of, but the concern is that when it comes to data, people are very, they question the data, the veracity of the data. So what's your conversation like, with investors there, and how big a problem will China be in the long run?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on in China that we just have to recognize, right? One is they're going through a massive structural transition. They're going from an investment-driven, export-oriented economy where you could control things. You could build bridges. There's more levers that are clearer for technocrats to push to a much more consumer service-based economy. And you can't tell consumers what to buy or how they're going to consume. But that's the shift that's going on. And we're seeing, and it's much larger. It's $11 trillion economy. There's no way you can keep growing at 8% like you were when you were a $2 trillion economy. So there's this fundamental transition that's going on, which is going to create bumpiness and noise. And it's a much less controlled growth. I think it's a higher quality growth because it's around the consumer. But the fundamentals are there. If you look at it, China's only 54% urbanized. There's still 20 million people a year going from rural areas to cities. There's still going to need to be infrastructure investment, but it's the consumer that's the story. They've gone from 38% of the economy being consumer to 50%. And the U.S. is at 80%. So that shift will continue. What you need to look at, though, is China it's bifurcated. What I mean, if you're in manufacturing, if you're in basic manufacturing, you're in steel, it's pain. There's a need for consolidation. If you're a state-owned enterprise, it's pain. If you are in the consumer, digital, in the private sector, financial services, it's boom time. It's just booming. So you have a very, very booming part of the economy, while at the same time you have a part of the economy that needs to be restructured.
So we cannot look at the Chinese economy as a monolithic entity. There's got a lot of dynamic,
But the net is, I believe, it's still moving. It's still an engine that's there. But I think it's much harder for a group of technocrats that are used to being able to have more, if you will, control to do that when it's that much larger and it's that much more consumer-based and not investor infrastructure.
So the government's ability in China to control the economy is by the day.
It's just more difficult.
Right. So Christine Lagarde has said some time back that the world needs to get used to lower growth. In fact, she called it the new mediocre.
Right.
So is it the same with both China and the developed markets?
No, I think that I still think there's a lot of potential in China. Obviously, India's doing superbly well at over 7.7% growth. Indonesia, I think, will continue to move, and I actually am quite bullish on some of the African economies. And I think we have to look at the potential. There is very significant potential in Brazil. Brazil has negatives. I think it's because of weak governance. That's why. So governance, something the Prime Minister talked about, is fundamental to how you can unlock the potential. So I don't think we should accept lower growth. I think we have to demand more of our political leaders and governance to unleash that growth. It's not because it's not there, it's because we're inhibiting it.
So fundamentally, you don't believe then that the world is moving towards a low growth regime in that sense?
I think there'll be I do think that there are some shifts that will suggest it's going to be lower than it was in the last 50 years because we have much less of a demographic dividend, for example, except in places like India. But we have a fundamentally older population. Older people consume less. They're not going to be part of the labor force. That's a headwind, right, as you go through it. But that said, there's a lot more new countries and new markets that are coming onto the system. So I think it's not a big debate in my view. There is a huge amount of potential for companies, for organizations to look at. The challenge, I think, is we have to unlock it. What infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure, is blocking the chance for growth. We're seeing that in regulatory morass, or the ease of doing business. There's a lot of things like that if we could get better governance, I think would see a higher level of growth. That, by the way, is the same in the U.S. We should see even higher growth. We have governance issues there. It's not just an emerging market thing. It's everywhere. So I think we should be more demanding of our governments in looking at the potential that's there and what's blocking it and what do we need to do to debottleneck.
So the kind of growth that the global economy has seen in the last 25, 30 years, which was primarily spearheaded by China, you still think that kind of growth is still possible?
I think it's possible. I actually do. I think, but it's going to need it's not going to happen by itself. And given the way it's going now, we are going to see lower growth. I think Christine Lagarde's right. We do seem to be slumping. Right. But I think we need better governance, and we need better governance to debottleneck and unlock it. And again, Brazil to me is a case study. You look at the fundamentals, the demographics, the infrastructure that needs to be built, the GDP per capita, the education. This place should be flying. It's not. It's not because a meteor hit the place. It's because of weak governance. Right.
Your views on the Prime Minister, Dom, because when he came to power, there was of course a lot of optimism. 22 months hence, I mean, have you have like some of the things you were hoping for? Because many thought that this is going to be the Thatcher-Reagan moment for India, in that sense. So how do you see it? Like, how do you see his government and his record so far in the last 22 months?
Well, I'm very positive on it because I think that there has been a fundamental shift. Again,
since he's come to power.
Since he's come to power, and it's a lot of it's in what he said. I mean, he said it last night too. The notion that business and entrepreneurship is good. It's not, you know what I mean? And he did talk about we need inclusive growth and so forth, but business is a fundamental driver. He believes that. People see it, so he's trying to shift it. And I think he's someone who has a track record. When he was in Gujarat, what he did, he delivered, if you know what I mean. So I think all the sort of the initiatives are out there. The issue is now implementation, and some things he can't control. I mean, you know better than me about how the upper house works and what. But I think that there's definitely been a sea change sentiment, mindset change in that we've got to unlock and we've got to get the potential of this economy. It's important for the poor as well as just the development of the overall economy. Right. So I feel even better about that because he's consistent in saying that. He said it last night. He says it when he's traveling. We're seeing that in investment. I mean, investment, FDI has gone up 30% roughly in the last, and there's more coming. If we can debottleneck. So I think the challenge is the implementation. I mean, he talked about that last night, the execution. How do we get people to deliver and debottleneck? And and government needs to take the same, if you will, medicine that we're all taking as the world changes in terms of driving stuff. And I think he's doing everything he can. So there's not a sort of a sense of a switcheroo. It's he's saying, I want to head this way. I've loaded this place up. I've put leaders in place. I've changed things. Let's move. I think he's as impatient. I'd love it to go faster.
Right.
I think others would, but you also recognize the reality. That said, let's keep the heat on.
Right. You alluded to just now, the upper house and basically the political deadlock. And I'm curious to know, how do you see this political acrimony from the outside? Is that a cause for concern when you see the level of, because especially with the Goods and Services Tax that's been in a limbo for so many years, and a legislation that was spearheaded by the previous government, and one thought that with this new government, since they were already on board, it'll go through. No. So is that a concern when you see India from the outside?
It is, but I also think there's if I could say it's happening 10 times better in some other place, then I would feel that way. But you look in the United States at the gridlock that's happening in Congress, even to get a budget approved to just pay the civil service. I mean, we're not being very effective all over the world on that front, and it is frustrating. I mean, I do think again there's I think with transparency, with the media putting spotlights and saying why are people debottlenecking? I mean, I think we need a lot more transparency. And one thing I believe strongly in is things like, let's say, infrastructure. Again, I think in the media, we should be talking about these projects and reviewing them regularly and saying, what is bottlenecking it? If it's political, let's put people are smart.
And
so
make them accountable.
Make them accountable. And I think there has to be a dialogue going, because I don't think the opposition, I don't think they're fundamentally wrong. There's politics. And we just got to realize there's a bigger cause here, which is nation building. We're not here to, do you want to be remembered in history, or do you want to be elected for a short term? We need a bit of a longer view. So I don't think there's I don't think there's a deep concern. It's obviously frustrating though, because you sit there and go, why are people doing that? It's obvious that there's politics. Like, stop it.
Right.
It's affecting people's lives. That's what I think is. I wish people who are in politics would think about what they're doing to people, and it's affecting people at the human level. That's what bugs me.
And politicians should be made accountable, because because if they delay, if there is a cost, we should hold people accountable.
I think it's key. We need that everywhere.
Right. On that note, let's quickly slip into a break. On the other side, there's lots more. Stay tuned.